Okay, my name is Michael Chapin Morgan. I was born August 9th, 1951, and then we moved into a house at 1441 Royal Boulevard at the corner of Royal and Imperial, and I lived there from roughly September of 55 till we moved out August 14th of 1981. And now I live up in Spar Heights on Rosemary. And I've gone to school here. I went to Incarnation Grade School from 1957, graduated in 1965 there, then went to St. Francis from 1965 and graduated in 1969, then went to Cal State LA. I had a friend, his name is Alan Frameth, and we've been friends since high school. I knew him as a freshman in high school at St. Francis, and I was searching around for a job, and he had got a job. There was a lady by the name of Joyce Hosick, and she hired all of the pages for all of the different branches. Anyway, he said, you want a job? Well, you can go and interview. Mrs. Hosick is looking for pages, and that's what our name was. We were pages like in books, pages, but I always liked that pun. And I went and interviewed with her. I was just starting Glendale College at the time, and she interviewed me, and I was of the right age and the right temperament, and I knew the library pretty well because my brother, John, who eventually would work at the library for 32 years, used to drive me down here to the library that's on Harvard, 222 Harvard, which was the Carnegie Library. And so I came, I interviewed. I started September 1st, 1969, and I worked in the Glendale Public Library, first here, and then the new library. I was working there till August 10th, 1973. Mostly putting books away, I graduated from that I was one of the people that did delivery. I went to all the different libraries, all the branches, and I dropped off the books that were supposed to go to Grandview and picked up the books at Grandview that were supposed to go to Casa Verdugo. And I would go to Casa Verdugo and pick up the books that they were supposed to go back to the Main. Everything that was out of order went back to Main, and there was a lady there. Her name was Juanita Lauer. One of her jobs was to have a big wooden table like this, and they would line up all these book bags, and then they would, like dealing out a deck of cards, these books go to Casa Verdugo, these books go to Brand, these books go up to Montrose and different places. And then we loaded them into the 1967 Chrysler station wagon and drove them around every day, Monday through Friday. And that was the best job in the whole world. And then I got the job that there was a gentleman that Friend Andy was the gentleman who had it before, which was on Saturdays. I went to all the houses, and all the naughty people that hadn't brought their books back, I was the one that knocked on their door, and I would go, yo soy de biblioteca, because at the time, it was still pretty much Hispanics and Anglos. There wasn't a large Armenian population at that time. And I'd say, I'm here from Glendale Public Library. This is what you owe, but we're not really interested in the money you owe. You can go to the library and pay for it at a later date. All we're interested in is for the book itself. The most memorable one is I went to one of the houses, and the house had caught fire, and the house had burnt down. And I went to the door, which was the door, not much else of the house was there. But I knocked on the door as I'm supposed to do, and somebody came around from the back, and they said, hi, I'm from the library, and you have some books that are overdue. And they just went like this, and it's like, there's no house here anymore. And I said, well, you'll have to deal with the library itself, but I want to let you know your books are overdue. They're probably in that pile of ash over there, but, it's the way it was. But it was a really good job. It was just an interesting place. And when you didn't have computers and you couldn't look up the internet, and there was no such thing as Google, everything you ever wanted to know was in that building, and it started, like it said, it was like November 14th, I believe, was in 1914 was the first time that it opened the brand new Carnegie Library, and it was a place where everybody went to. And there's a picture in here somewhere when this opened, and I think it's in April of this year. It will be the 50th anniversary. So the Carnegie Library lasted for 59 years, and this one now is 50 years. And I worked in this library 50 years ago, and if you had told me 50 years ago I'd be here, I would have said, no, you can't, no, I'm not going to live that long to begin with. That's a long time. Well, the reason they outgrew the library, because the old library, the Carnegie Library, is because they literally outgrew it. They kept buying books. They kept bringing the books. They didn't believe in throwing material away. I don't recall in the years that I was at the Carnegie Library that we threw away anything. And every spot that we could find to cubbyhole a book, we put it, like I said, at the top of all the bookshelves, we had books. And it just got to that point by 1972 that they didn't know what to do with it. So I'm not sure of the ins and outs as to why they decided to, do a new library. I do know that it had outgrown its space. And if you look at the new library, the brutalistic library, it's so much bigger. I mean, when we first moved in here, it was like we couldn't believe we didn't have to put anything on top, and none of the shelves were full. The shelves were maybe half full on all of them, and we had so many more books than we had ever had before, and it was easier to put them in their place, and it just looked classy. The other place, I mean, I loved it, but it looked kind of ratty. It had outlived its reason for being around in the whole bit. So, and then they could hire more people. That was the other thing. You have to worry when you work for the city. You have a budget. If you want to increase your budget, you have to do something that will increase the budget. So, with a larger library, you have more librarians. You can hire more pages and other stuff. And we got custodians, which we only had one custodian. His name was Glenn in the old building, and he had been there probably since the 40s. A really good guy, and but when the new library came in, they needed more than one custodian. They needed just more worker bees and a lot of stuff, and it was just incredibly more new, I guess, modern, I guess is the word I really want to say on it. It's like, think of it kind of as like, the old library was kind of like a Model T, and the new library was kind of like a spaceship. It was huge. I mean, it didn't take them a long time, if I recall, that they had everything moved over here, because they had plenty of shelving. So it wasn't a problem of shoehorning anything in. It was just we're going to do reader service today, and it's going to do, and we have 3 days to get it done, and we'll get it done. And I recall they had these kind of like escalators, but they weren't escalators. That would rotate on the ground. They're not the ones that go up, but just straight across. And we're only, I don't know, 50 yards from the old library. So you could load the boxes of books onto the whatever it's called, and move it over here. So, and around here, there tend to be a lot more homes. I mean, today there are more apartment buildings, condominiums, the whole thing. But in fact, around the corner from where the old library was, Marion Morris and John Wayne lived. So he went to Glendale Union High School, which was at this spot, and right across the street was the library. And he wasn't valedictorian, but he was high up there on the list. And he spent a lot of time here. That's not something that people ever bring up, but he was kind of a bookish person. The picture of him in 1924 yearbook has a picture of him leaning up against the wall. He's holding a book at the time, reading it. So, and that's kind of the way Glendale saw itself, not as so much as John Wayne, but the fact that they wanted to learn. They wanted, everybody needed to be educated, and the library was a main source of everything. Now what you got, everything, and on this, we had in these beautiful buildings. And so lots of people on Friday nights, you'd say, well, I'm going to the library. But, there were other places to go. Back then in Glendale, we had lots more movie theaters. I mean, there were quite a few movie theaters that don't exist anymore. And lots of people would go, I'm going to the library, but the reality was they weren't going to the library. They were going someplace else and sneaking out. So it's hard to describe. It's like, imagine living out in the country and then coming into New York, and you look around and you go, oh my gosh, there's so much more out there. And it was the same kind of reaction when they opened the doors. For days they've been saying, well, it's going to be opening, the new library is going to be opening, and people waited, and then they opened the doors, and if somewhere they can show you some of the pictures, the people came. Like they say, if you build it, people will come, and people came. Now, because it's been here for 50 years, it's kind of mundane, and you've seen it, but you have to take and I know you got to be at least as old as I am to take yourself back that far back, but we pages were really astounded by it. I mean, we knew it was coming, but we had been raised in the Carnegie Library, which was very cramped, and and you really couldn't really express yourself very well as a page there. So the people tended to be very well-mannered on everything. So people would give things. Like I had a patron that came in, and he had done a poem, which I still have, and he had been working on, it was called Ode to a Diode, because back then they didn't have computers, they didn't have, a diode would be, oh, wow, how interesting in the whole bit. And I don't know why he gave it to me, but I kept it. It was just, they liked to do things for the pages. They loved, some of the, everybody kind of had their favorite librarian. So Alma Danford, she worked with the Tuesday Afternoon Club. Now, the Tuesday Afternoon Club were people that bought property in Glendale. Now, you have to understand, this is before, about the time Glendale was incorporated, around 1906. And what the Tuesday Afternoon Club wanted a library. They met on Tuesday afternoon. It was kind of a luncheon and did all sorts of stuff, but they were kind of a Glendale Improvement Association in many, many ways, a women's club more than anything else. And what does every city have? They have a library. Well, Glendale didn't have a library. This is before 1914. So Alma Danford and them, they bought land in Glendale. And the thing about land in Glendale after about 1906 is it increased in value a lot. So they would buy land, and I can take you to where the old library was, and the corners around there, they bought all three corners because the other one was going to be another building. And they held it on for a year, and then they sold it, and they got money. And they used that money to help with the Carnegie Library. Now, the Carnegie Library, it was made, like I said, November of 1914. It was Andrew Carnegie had an endowment, and Glendale was one of the beneficiaries of the endowment. It was $12,500, which was a sizable amount of money in 1914. And Alma was one of those people. The thing you have to see about Glendale, though it's kind of conservative in the state, it's also had this idea that it's very progressive. And Glendale was a very progressive city in so many ways. I can point to things that they've done. We did that because we're progressive. They had two newspapers, an evening and an early paper, because we're progressive. And so Alma was with the Tuesday Afternoon Club, and they started collecting books. What do? We collect books. Now, if we have books, what are we going to do with them? Well, we have to have a library. It's just A follows B follows C, 1, 2, 3. And so she was one of the people that was able to get the money from the Carnegie endowment, the $12,500, and they built the Carnegie Library. And who gets to be the first librarian to it is Alma Danford. And she stayed there for, I guess, until the 30s, because I'm looking at this picture here in the 30s and Alma's not there. But I just imagine her putting all of her soul and heart into the library. And you can see it in the building. If you look at these pictures, I invite you to come down and come to the history room and take a look at these pictures and see what she did for this place. It's fantastic. And see what they've carried on. You know, we carry on, we stand on people's shoulders.